It was December 29th in the year 1170 AD when Archbishop Thomas Becket is brutally attacked in Canterbury Cathedral by 4 knights of King Henry II of England, apparently on orders of the king. He continued his eternity as a result. In 1155, Henry II appointed Becket as Chancellor, a high post in the English government. Becket proved a skilled diplomat and won the trust of Henry, who nominated him as Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162. The king hoped his friend would help in his efforts to curb the growing power of the church. However, soon after his consecration, the new archbishop emerged a zealous defender of the jurisdiction of the church over its own affairs. In 1164, Becket was forced to flee to France under fear of retaliation by the king. He was later reconciled with Henry, and in 1170 returned to Canterbury amid great public rejoicing. Soon afterward, against the objections of the Pope, Henry had his son crowned co-king by the Archbishop of York, and tensions again came to a head between Becket and Henry. At this time, perhaps merely in a moment of frustration, the king issued to his court the following public plea, quote, "What a parcel of fools and dastards have I nourished in my house, and not one of them will avenge me of this one upstart clerk," unquote. A group of Henry's knights took the statement very seriously, and on December 29th, Thomas Becket was attacked in Canterbury Cathedral. The Christian world was shocked by what happened to Thomas Becket, and in 1173, he was canonized a Catholic saint. In 1174, Henry was forced to do penance at his tomb, and his efforts to end the separation between church and state ceased. In 1220, Becket's bones were transferred to Trinity Chapel in Canterbury Cathedral, which later became a popular site of English religious pilgrimage. On December 29th in 1845, 6 months after the Congress of the Republic of Texas accepts U.S. annexation of the territory, Texas is admitted into the United States. Texas was now our 28th state. After gaining independence from Spain in the 1820s, Mexico welcomed foreign settlers to sparsely populated Texas after a large group of Americans, led by Stephen F. Austin, settled along the Brazos River. The Americans soon outnumbered the resident Mexicans, and by the 1830s, attempts by the Mexican government to regulate these semi-autonomous American communities led to rebellion. In March of 1836, in the midst of armed conflict with the Mexican government, Texas declared its independence from Mexico. The Texas Volunteers initially suffered defeat against the forces of Mexican General Santa Anna. The Alamo fell, and Sam Houston's troops were forced into an eastward retreat. However, in late April, Houston's troops surprised a Mexican force at San Jacinto, and Santa Anna was captured, bringing an end to Mexico's effort to subdue Texas. The citizens of the independent Republic of Texas elected Sam Houston president, but also endorsed the entrance of Texas into the Union. The likelihood of Texas joining the Union as a slave state delayed any formal action by the U.S. Congress for more than a decade. In 1844, Congress finally agreed to annex the territory of Texas. On December 29th in 1845, Texas entered the United States as a slave state, broadening the irrepressible differences in the U.S. over the issue of slavery and setting off the Mexican-American War. On the evening of December 29th in 1940, London suffered its most devastating air raid when Germans firebombed the city. Hundreds of fires caused by the exploding bombs engulfed areas of London, but firefighters showed a valiant indifference to the bombs falling around them and saved much of the city from destruction. The next day, a newspaper photo of St. Paul's Cathedral standing undamaged amid the smoke and flames seemed to symbolize the capital's unconquerable spirit during the Battle of Britain. In May and June of 1940, Holland, Belgium, Norway, and France fell one by one to the German Wehrmacht, leaving Great Britain alone in its resistance against Nazi leader Adolf Hitler's plans for world domination. The British Expeditionary Force escaped the continent with an impromptu evacuation from Dunkirk, but they left behind the tanks and artillery needed to defend their homeland against invasion. With British air and land forces outnumbered by their German counterparts and U.S. aid not yet begun, it seemed certain that Britain would soon follow the fate of France. However, Winston Churchill, the new British Prime Minister, promised his nation and the world that Britain would never surrender, and the British people mobilized behind their defiant leader. On June 5th, the Luftwaffe began attacks on English Channel ports and convoys, and on June 30th, Germany seized control of the undefended Channel Islands. On July 10th, the first day of the Battle of Britain, according to the Royal Air Force, the Luftwaffe intensified its bombing of British ports. 6 days later, Hitler ordered the German Army and Navy to prepare for Operation Sea Lion. On July 19th, the German leader made a speech in Berlin in which he offered a conditional peace to the British government. Britain would keep its empire and be spared from invasion if its leaders accepted the German domination of the European continent. A simple radio message from Lord Halifax swept the proposal away. Germany needed to master the skies over Britain if it was to transport safely its superior land forces across the 21-mile English Channel. On August 8th, the Luftwaffe intensified its raids against the ports in an attempt to draw the British air fleet out into the open. Simultaneously, the Germans began bombing Britain's sophisticated radar defense system and RAF fighter airfields. During August, as many as 1,500 German aircraft crossed the channel daily, often blotting out the sun as they flew against their British targets. Despite the odds against them, the outnumbered RAF flyers successfully resisted the massive German air invasion, relying on radar technology, more maneuverable aircraft, and exceptional bravery. For every British plane shot down, 2 Luftwaffe warplanes were destroyed. At the end of August, the Royal Air Force launched a retaliatory air raid against Berlin. Hitler was enraged and ordered the Luftwaffe to shift its attacks from RAF installations to London and other British cities. On September 7th, the Blitz against London began, and after a week of almost ceaseless attacks, several areas of London were in flames, and the Royal Palace, churches, and hospitals had all been hit. However, the concentration on London allowed the RAF to recuperate elsewhere, and on September 15th, the RAF launched a vigorous counterattack, downing 56 German aircraft in 2 dogfights that lasted less than an hour. The costly raid convinced the German high command that the Luftwaffe could not achieve air supremacy over Britain, and the next day, daylight attacks were replaced with nighttime sorties as a concession of defeat. On September 19th, Nazi leader Adolf Hitler postponed indefinitely Operation Sea Lion, the amphibious invasion of Britain. The Battle of Britain, however, continued. In October, Hitler ordered a massive bombing campaign against London and other cities to crush British morale and force an armistice. Despite significant loss of life and tremendous material damage to Britain's cities, the country's resolve remained unbroken. The ability of Londoners to maintain their composure had much to do with Britain's survival during this trying period. As American journalist Edward R. Murrow reported, quote, "Not once have I heard a man, woman, or child suggest that Britain should throw her hand," unquote. In May of 1941, the air raids essentially ceased as German forces massed near the border of the USSR. By denying the Germans a quick victory, depriving them of forces to be used in their invasion of the USSR, and proving to America that increased arms support for Britain was not in vain, the outcome of the Battle of Britain greatly changed the course of World War II. As Churchill said of the RAF flyers during the Battle of Britain, quote, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few," unquote. Historic information, the roles, and documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.